pronouncenames.com.
Коля.
Oh, no way I'm gonna pronounce that correctly. Try again.
Коля.
What?
Коля.
Oh, can I say Kolya? Please?
Do we have the correct pronunciation of your name?
Yeah, mine is simple. It's just Eva. Listen, guys, I apologize. I can't pronounce it that way. I'm not gonna train myself for the next 5 hours in order to do this video. So I'm gonna pronounce it Kolya, okay? Benioff. I need to forgive you for the last season of Game of Thrones after reading this. I am here today to do actually something that I have not done in ages. I did not sit down and do a whole book review on my channel in maybe ages. Probably one of the last ones I have done is for Hunted by Chuck Palahniuk, and I kept saying throughout the years I would bring them back, and so here I am deciding that I am gonna really try once a month to do a in-depth review. Mostly this is my excuse also to go into spoilers, which I try to steer clear of during my wrap-ups. I just think it's fair enough not to go into spoilers. I do go into spoilers in my Goodreads and Storygraph, but never in my wrap-ups, unless I really like cross my finger and let you know. But I thought this book really needed a bit of more unpacking because of how much I cherished my experience of reading it and how much it stuck with me afterwards. How I came across this book is actually very simple. I was watching one of my one of the booktube channels that I usually follow. I'll link them down below. It's a very wholesome channel and I really enjoy their content. So I was just, watching the favorite of the year, and I'd heard of this title before, but I never connected it to the actual showrunner, one of the showrunners of Game of Thrones. And I was like, oh, that's the Benioff they mean when they explained, the background of this book on their channel. And so I was like, oh, I need to read that, because without doubts I did particularly enjoy Game of Thrones overall, and I think that the dialogues as a TV show, fantasy, or any other TV show were absolutely brilliant. And so I said, okay, it sounds like something that I don't mind historical fiction, and I really actually am curious now to read a book by one of the showrunners. Benioff also worked at Troy, again a movie that I love. I think he also worked on Wolverine. I want to say Wolverine or like an X-Men movie. I found this used, so it's a bit of a battered copy, my copy, but I really enjoyed this cover as well. I think there is an alternative cover that you can find, and I was like, let's give it a try. So this takes place during World War II, and it's the story of Lev and Kolya that need to go on an impossible mission of finding a dozen eggs for one general of NKVD division in the Russian army. Don't ask me how the NKVD and the Russian army worked during World War II, because I'm completely ignorant about it, but my understanding is that they were very high ranking and also they had access to food, which the general population really did not have access to. Lev is in prison in the cell, he meets Kolya, and they are given a choice of either being executed or to go and find these eggs. So of course they take the eggs option, and they start this journey of finding what would nowadays consider like a everyday goods. We would never question the availability of eggs, at least in the Western world, at least in UK, in London where I live, I can find eggs pretty easily. But at the time in Leningrad, where this takes place, it's basically near to impossible to find any. So they actually need to leave Leningrad throughout this novel, and they will need eventually to enter enemy lines to find something. Now there is also like a blur I've heard that says this is the story of, it's a historical fiction of how the protagonist recounts the story of how his grandfather found his wife and the love of his life. So that's also thrown in the mix, because throughout this journey Lev will meet the love of his life. And it is a bit cheeky at the beginning, because it is presented to us as if David Benioff is sitting down with his grandfather, and the grandfather is telling him the story of how he met his grandmother. For a little while, I believed this was actually autobiographical or it was a memoir. Then it turns out that when I went on the internet, it's not. It's completely fiction. And I don't know why he chose to do that. I don't know why he chose to make it pretend like it's his grandfather's story. I generally don't know. That would be a good question to ask the guy if I ever met him. But it took me a while to realize that this wasn't, and there were a couple of things that told me that this was, and which I'll cover in a second. But first of all, I must say that for 260 oddish pages, this book captured my heart. I kept thinking about this book while I was not reading it, because I read multiple books at a time. And also I kept being like almost in anguish on certain scenes that have been shown to us. This is not the most disturbing book I ever read. I've read other stuff by World War II. One of the most probably disturbing things I've read, which featured in one video, I made a video about the 10 most disturbing books ever written, which I read. There is, what's it called, The Painted Bird? I'm gonna insert the name here. So that also depicts absolute atrocities. Somehow though, I remember very few scenes from the other book, while this book, it's so fresh in my mind. And yes, I just finished that, while the other book I had finished a long time ago, but I remember not being impacted by the other book as much as I've been impacted by some scenes into this, which tells me that the prose and the way the story is presented to us was particularly effective, or it was particularly effective for me at least. Because Benioff made me care. It made me care so bloody much. It made me care so bloody much about these characters that I was generally upset and distraught when things would happen, to the point that days after, when I finished this book, actually, I remember like the whole day I was in a very bad mood, and I was like, why am I upset? Like nothing has happened in my life to justify my moodiness. And then I realized, well, it's because of a bloody book. It really left a mark. And to be fair, how can Collier not leave a mark? So I tend these days to do something, which is write notes as I read the books. So I've got a note, ongoing note on my phone, and as some passages capture my attention or some thoughts emerge, I would just write those down. And a lot of those passages where I had written thoughts, they were quite emotional. So while in other books my thoughts might be very logical, I noticed the change in when I was writing down stuff about these. It was more about my emotions and how this book had made me feel, which ultimately realizes what makes a book an ultimate favorite of mine. I would say that if you ask me now what is one of, let me know the top 20 books of all your life, I would definitely have to make space for City of Thieves. As I wrote in my Goodreads, because I generally believe it, I don't think a novel needs to be perfect. I feel like a novel needs to be meaningful. And I took a lot of meanings out of this novel, that it's a lifetime compacted into 160 pages, which often word fiction is, because you experiment fleeting joy and utter devastation in a novel. And well, to be fair, it's more devastation than joy when it comes down to war fiction. But there are some ways in which this story is told that just impressed me. As Game of Thrones, for example, impressed me at times, I think there are some scenes, some dialogues between a couple of characters that I might really remember, and I've been remembering them for like, I don't know why, like 8 years, 10 years now, since season 1. Don't quote me on these, because I'm not very good at doing math in my mind when I'm speaking, but what I'm meaning is there is something of his prose and probably of his just style of recounting stories, either in a script or in a book, that calls to me particularly. And I just want to say, first of all, how grateful I am on booktube, because generally the community, like people that I never speak with, that will probably never speak with, but still I get recommendations out of people making videos about books that I loved, and I end up finding such gems, some again meaningful reads for me. So that makes me feel like how happy I am that there is this content available to me, that there is a community of people that I can watch and get recommendation and then experience those emotions for myself. That's something that I generally cherish a lot. Then it makes me also think of the importance of finding books that just seeps under your skin, and then you will then carry on them with you, and you can recommend to other people, you can share the love, you can share like, you have to read this is amazing, like what emotions they call in you, what passages stood out with you. You can have conversations. But as art in general, which is true for movies or singing, for example, I love people that can sing, because singing, to me at least, sparks emotions. When someone sings or dance or makes a, like, you know, a theater performance or a movie performance, I can feel those emotions. That's something that I am actively seeking. It's something that actively make me feel, gives me meaning, or video feeling, like feeling connections, powerful connection with people, feeling emotions through art. That's another one. I get a lot of meaning out of life by being able to feel, to express my emotions, good or bad they were. And when you can make me feel the amount of feelings that this guy did in this book, it creates a bond between me and the book in this case. And it's a bond that I know it's there to stay. So find the book. I hope it's this, but it could be any other book, you know, that you found that special bond with, that changed you a little bit, made you a bit more, I don't want to say better, but made you a bit more wiser, or made you a bit more wiser by having, you know, allowed you to experience emotions that you did not know you could connect with. I never experienced World War II, but now I feel like I felt the emotions of his characters. So in a sense, I experienced the emotions of someone who was in a war. Didn't experience the war, but I've experienced their emotions. So that is precious, because that is empathy for me, is there, right? Being able to feel with someone. I must say I appreciate a lot his prose and also his character of Lev and the stream of consciousness of Lev, because Lev is someone who might say something and then in his mind goes, oh, did I say the right thing? Maybe I shouldn't have said that. Maybe I come across like this, which is something that we do all the time. Like I do all the time. Like, you know, I say something and then I'm thinking, whoa, what did I just say? What if I've said that instead? Or what's going to happen next? So it made me relate with Lev a lot. It made me, you know, think like he's a young boy going through things that are so much bigger than any of us could even, you know, actually think of. Even when you are in the midst of certain things so traumatic as these, I think you very much get into survival mode. So you don't really stop and think, you just survive the day. And when you have time to stop and think of actually what you're going through, that's when actually you get the trauma responses, right? From panic attacks, from PTSD symptoms, from dissociation, whatever it is. So we're going through emotions with Lev. And I think that's something that really came across as they were surviving. There were moments in this point where they're just walking through the snow and he goes, I just generally don't know how I am walking. I just know that my feet are moving. My brain is not here. My mind is not here. I'm just physically moving forward, because the alternative would be to just die in the snow. And that is, yeah, it's just something that gives me the shivers still thinking about when your brain completely detached from your body. So yeah, having worked with trauma survivors in the past, and currently I know that, you know, the mind and the body and the way they work when you are experiencing trauma or in the aftermath, it could go in so many ways. So I think the way he depicts the trauma they're experiencing, it's not too detailed if you want. It's just some sentences here and there that I think they do the job very well on telling me this is what's happening right now. And I can see that reflected in, you know, real life people. So loved the stream of consciousness. Kolya. So Kolya is, what do you say? Larger than legend? Larger than legend? One of a kind? I don't know what you want to say. Kolya is that character that you can never forget. While Lev is all of us. Like, I've got the impression that Lev is us. Lev could be me. Kolya is that unique individual that you might meet, if you're lucky, once in your lifetime and never again. And Kolya, I knew from the start, because of how he was, I knew he was a goner. I had this feeling and I wrote down in my notes, oh, I'm loving Kolya. I know he probably has very little chance of surviving this. And because also, like, at the beginning of the story, the nephew does not know anything about Kolya, doesn't mention Kolya, and I thought if Kolya was alive, the nephew would have mentioned it by now. I can't believe that you live all your life without knowing who Kolya is. So the fact that the nephew had never mentioned Kolya, just the grandmother told me that Kolya wouldn't be in the picture. So likely he would be dead, because we're talking about wartime, right? So 2 + 2, 4. Kolya is dead. Kolya is unique. And so from the start, I was like, he's gonna go, he's gonna go, he's gonna go. And then Benioff does make him go. And it does it in a way that I found it's not glamorized. Kolya dies for a stupid mistake. And that's how unfortunately a lot of people lose their lives. And again, there is the contrast of bloody hell, why, and bloody hell, that actually sounds quite plausible. And the final piece in the car where Kolya keeps going about being shot in the ass and he's literally bleeding out, he's really dying, and he stays himself until the very end. I at that point when Kolya was dying, I was groaning like, oh, like no, and then I was just crying. And I don't do that often. I actually never do it apart from when I'm reading a book about a plane crash. But that's not emotional. That's my phobias telling my brain, this is horrifying, imagine you being in a plane going down, right? So my brain reacts to it, cry, cry, cry. This is a cry where I am with the story, where actually it's a crying, it's an emotional crying. And I was just a mess. And I remained in a very bad mood for the rest of the day because Kolya died. I also had this attachment with Kolya because of, despite he comes across as very confident, right? It was very like, don't worry, I've got these. But when Kolya talks about this author that is writing this book that turns up to be him, right? You can see actually that spark of self-doubt or that need of, you know, being appreciated by others, which we all have. Like even the most confident person on earth wants acceptance, wants to hear, well done, you're doing well. So him sneaking bits and bobs is like, so that's how the book starts. What do you think about it, right? But taking time and the courage to admit that that's his book, it just made him feel so human. Like, yes, you can be braggy and, you know, confident and come across as this exuberant, super social guy, but seeing that side of him, seeing that he still had something that he cared so much about that he was not so confident about, it just made me root for him so much. So distraught is I don't even have the right words to say, you know, what I felt when Kolya died. And for a second I was like, no, please, like, no, it's not gonna happen, it's gonna end well. But this is Benioff. This is the guy who worked on Game of Thrones. I knew better all along, and I generally thought I had lost someone who, even if it was just a fictional character, I wish it could have lived forever, at least in this vision I had of the story. And the idea of, you know, it felt like a hole that could never be filled. So yeah, I had that very sensation of having known Kolya all my life, but it would be better said I knew Kolya all his life, because his life starts at, you know, I don't know, page 20 and goes on until page 55 or something. So all of his existence I spent with him, or you have spent with him if you read this book. I still get a bit of a, like, something drop in my stomach when I think about Kolya and everything that these guys have been through together. These characters, there were a few of them. This is not a book full of people. This is a book, though, even when you meet someone who is no longer there, you only know them when they're already underground, when they're already dead, he still makes you care. Zoya bit, there is the part where, you know, the house in the woods with the girls, they are prostituting themselves in order to stay alive, and they are prostitutes for the a subsection of the Nazi army. And they used to have this girl, Zoya, that she tried to flee at one point and she was tortured and then left bleeding. Zoya was a sucker punch for me. Like, I was like, I knew it was coming, because I knew that when they start speaking about, you know, the way the construction of that conversation was happening, I was like, oh, I'm gonna hear something that is gonna make me feel sick to my stomach. And then it happened, and again, it wasn't the torture I was expecting, and it caught me off guard, and I was like, so I had to take a moment to readjust, to reassess, and then all of a sudden Zoya's revenge became my revenge. Now it was about, I needed to get that fucker killed, like I needed to see him bleed to death. And so all the events that happen afterward, when they actually go, you know, find him, and eventually they do kill him in a brilliant way. Zoya maybe was in a page, maybe it was in 1 or 2 pages, and then again it made me care enough that I never dismissed the importance of getting that motherfucker killed. So that is something that takes skills, because how many times I read about people being killed in books, actually all the time, probably once a day at least. I read, if I can, once a day for a few hours, or for an hour or two a night, and lo and behold, a lot of people get killed in a lot of the books I read, apart from non-fiction. Well, unless when I read true crime, a lot of people get killed. But I don't care necessarily to, to find the culprit and have justice as much as I cared for Zoya. And again, if this is a war situation, people are dying left and right. And again, but what happened to Zoya, the way it was constructed, the way it was presented to us, had an effect on me that all the other deaths didn't have. And when you meet the partisan, when you actually come across Vic, first of all, yeah, I knew Vic was the grandmother pretty much from the start. I was like, oh, here she is. The grandma's come around, and she's bloody cool. So I knew that grandma was there at the point when Vic arrives, but she arrives with a group of partisans. And even the description of how this partisan eventually get killed, I was like, I just spent maybe 10 pages with you, maybe not even that. Maybe you're not even a likable character, but again, the way you die, I can really picture what's happening right now when they try to infiltrate the group, to not being picked and killed. So they try to infiltrate a group of prisoners, right? And one of the prisoners already there recognizes one of the partisans, and the partisan gets killed. I was like, that I could picture myself being in a bloody cold tundra, like nothing around, if not freezing cold, prisoner, and knowing that you're about to go to your death, and then seeing that play out. I was there with them. At all points I was there with them. And I think maybe that's why I love his writing particularly, because it's not particularly fanciful. It doesn't use like very poetic words. It just uses very effective sentences. I don't mind flowery writing. It could be beautiful, but it can get too much. He doesn't do that. He does nice writing. I can picture the atmosphere exactly how it is. It's very effective. Without being overly descriptive, I would say. The girls, their house in the woods, it was almost like, I read a lot of horror, and I can generally say that a lot of the things happen in this book disturbed me more than things I might read in a horror. There is also an element, I guess, of just reading about World War II, which has happened. I know that the author, although this is not a biography or a true story, he has done a lot of research around what happened in Russia during the invasion of the Nazis. So the animal cruelty, there is animal cruelty in here. The dog bit was very, very hard for me to hear about dogs being blown apart. I do have a thing for animals being tortured and killed. I think it stems from the fact that I have this huge sense of they are powerless, they don't have any tools to defend themselves against us. And so exploiting someone who's powerless is one of the most evil things I think you can do. And unfortunately, we do it a lot because it's easier to overpower someone who can't fight back. So that bits are very difficult. It's like when I read about children, they can't defend ourselves against us, against an adult. And therefore, there is a added layer of injustice. Not saying that, a grown-up man being killed by another grown-up man, it's okay with me at all. But I think killing someone who's not even have any resources to even try to defend themselves, but I don't know, for me it just adds a layer to injustice. And as many of us, when we are in front of an injustice, we get anger in response, or sadness, or both. The bit about Darling, this is what told me that, this man is a great writer, because at one point they find a hen. They think it's a hen, they finally get the hen, they have very wild ideas of how many eggs a hen can produce in a day or two, but that is a very far-fetched idea of how much eggs can be produced in a day. And then when they find out that the hen is actually a rooster, they just bloody cook it and make a soup out of it. So for a second I was like, oh no, like you can't eat Darling. And then I thought, well, bloody hell, wouldn't you, in war where you're dying of hunger, wouldn't you eat a rooster? Just because you cuddle it for 5 hours, you wouldn't die for a rooster, right? No one would, and they don't, and so they cook the rooster, and they have chicken soup. Although it was upsetting, I really appreciated that he does not make things easier for the reader. The things he says about the war, the scenes he depicts, there is violence, there's a lot of violence, but I don't think it's like a violence for the sake of violence. This is the violence of, this is war. You're gonna read things that are gonna make you uncomfortable. And if you don't like it, I can assure you that none of those that lived through it liked it. And these are things that, despite the fact that they might impact me, they might actually leave me, with a lot of negative feelings. There are things that I believe we need to read, as I think we should go and see Auschwitz. They should bring older teenagers that are mature enough to be able to deal with negative emotions. But we should go on trips mandatory to see what happened during those times, because there is a very famous quote of someone, I don't remember who, but said, if you do not learn your history, you're doomed to repeat it. I would argue that unfortunately, even if you know it, you're still doomed to repeat it, because we are humans. But that's a whole new argument. But what I'm saying is, despite me saying, the animal cruelty got to me, or despite me saying all of these people dying was very hard, I also believe that was absolutely essential to communicate the cruelty of things that really did happen. Not exactly the events of a dog, dozen eggs, but the war in Russia and probably everything that he put in terms of what happened to people living in the country trying to make to survive this occupation. They are probably rooted in truth. In my eyes, Benioff is a very good storyteller, and there are so many things during this novel that told me so. I particularly, for example, admired or found particularly brilliant, maybe that would be better said, the end when Lev has just lost Kolya, and clearly they have bonded. Clearly is such a loss for Lev, and he gets back to the general with the eggs, and the general is like, oh yeah, just put them on top of the others. So it turns out that actually they had eggs, they didn't need the eggs. Which, by the way, opening brackets here, if you've read this book and you know how come then the general sent them to find eggs, like if you know the meaning behind the general sending them on a mission that really was pointless. Now, closing that bit, which is not clear, and maybe there is no reason, maybe it was for the sake of it. So Lev is clearly at the point furious, like he's actually almost speechless because of realizing that Kolya died for a pointless mission. And the general comes closer to Lev, and I think he even touches his face, so don't quote me on this, but I think I remember something of the sort, and he says, whether you're thinking right now, do not speak, do not tell me if you know what's best for you. So that figure of a general that has basically condemned them to death, and now that one of them is back, he's telling them, whatever you want to tell me, if you're going to probably insult me, you're probably going to tell me, that I'm horrible, whether is, and I will have a reaction to that, and I will potentially, make you go to a firing squad. So do not tell me, because I don't want to kill you. But if you tell me, then I will. And I personally interpreted that as honesty in the evilness of the whole thing, right? So it's honesty in saying, I'm not a good man. So if you tell me what you think about me, then my ego is gonna pop up, right? You're gonna end up being killed because I'm gonna give the order to kill you if you tell me anything that I don't want to hear. But because I know that, because I know myself, do not tell me anything. Do not tell, shut up, go about your day, and your life is spared. And there is a bit of honesty in that, right? Now that is for me both excellent storytelling, because it's a story. Because in reality, I doubt that in the majority of occasions, not in all occasions, but in the majority of occasions, someone would actually be so honest with himself and therefore with other people in admitting that. Like Benioff created like a story that it's great, and yet it feels very much like a story. I think that the combination of real facts of the atrocities of the war that are depicted in these blend perfectly with the story of Lev and Kolya and Vic that they meet, because that is very much like a legend, right? I can picture these story being told around a campfire. Is those kind of legends that are steeped in truth, but they very much feel like a story told around the campfire of these heroes, impossible heroes, going and, you know, defying impossible odds and losing along the way. I love the very end, the last sentence that Vic says. I thought it was brilliant. So maybe that's why I loved it so much, because it felt both depicting reality, but at the same time telling me of the reality, giving me characters and made me feel like I was reading a story. You know, those stories that contain all those elements that I love, from, you know, big emotions to like a lot of funny banter, a lot of situations that are almost absurd and almost horror. I read certain scenes like remind me of a horror book. And then throwing in like some simple but yet very efficient messages about the meaning of life. For example, there is a point where Collier says, you know, I don't believe all of these people that on the radio, all of these famous people that on the radio tells us, you know, just pick up your weapon and fight. And they are telling these from the safety of another city when there are no Nazi around. So they went to safety, and then they try to make us, the common people, pick up the weapon and fight on their behalf. If you really believe in fighting for our freedom, why you're not here on the front line? Which is such a good point. So how these leaders, or these even like moral leaders, they pretend to, you know, they make these big speeches, they pitch these, you know, courageous speeches of defend your country, and then they are the first one who do not do it, who actually hide. It's a legend, but it's also the truth of the war. And some sentences, some discussions are very much relevant to World War II as they are nowadays. So it's the blend of all of those things. Now, do I think this is absolutely perfect on perfect? Do I think this is a perfect novel? I think it is perfect in my eyes. I don't think it might be for everyone. I don't think it's objectively perfect on all sides. I do, for example, have maybe the only critique that I personally still hold with me, despite me, again, this is a 5 stars, probably has entered the Hall of Fame with, you know, my favorite books of all time. I do have a critique of how much Lev comments as a lot of stream of consciousness, a lot of thoughts on women body. Now, I do want to get also the picture clear. This is a 17-18-year-old boy deprived of all human interactions that a teenage boy might seek during, you know, that period of their life. Is clearly hormonal and is clearly, you know, every woman he meets is about, you know, how he would like to have sex with her or kiss her or whatever it is. And initially it bothered me quite a lot. I was like, okay, Lev, like, you know, we don't have much time together, just move on. I get it, you fancy her. And what really, at the end, when I unpacked it, really bothered me of that was it made this is my grandpa telling me the story quite unbelievable, because I can't imagine a grandpa sitting with his nephew and spending so much time on telling them about how much they want to grab her ass or see her tits. It's not realistic, right? Grandpa might say, oh, I saw this girl, was beautiful, I really fancied her, I really tried to make a move on her, but Grandpa wouldn't spend 2 pages, or not 2 pages, maybe it's a bit exaggerated, but wouldn't spend the whole paragraph describing the body and what he would like to do to her, which is the first signal that told me this is not real, this is not a true story. And that's when I actually Googled it. That's when I said, this is too much, like it doesn't sound like a real story. Googled it, turns out I was right, it wasn't a true story. In itself, as a plot point, a part of a plot makes it non-credible. To be fair, eventually it became like so normal for me to see this in Lev's character, like it was him walking, like yeah, he makes comments about Vic, like I get it by now, like I got used to it. I must say, I don't have any lived experience of being a teenage boy, and so I do not know how accurate this might be. It might actually be extremely accurate as a depiction of what goes on in the mind of a teenage boy. Now, the author is a guy, so I probably trust his stream of consciousness of a teenage boy more than I would trust my stream of consciousness if I was to write about, you know, of how much I would trust my accuracy in, you know, if I was to write a story about a teenage boy. Probably I would have less insight just because I don't have lived experience than a man might have from his past. So I'm not saying it's not realistic or it's too far-fetched. I'm just saying it gave a story away. It told me this is not really a nephew asking the grandpa what's going on, like what happened to them. And yeah, indeed, that's what made me Google it. So I try to be still objective, I think, of books that I love like this one. Also want to be objective, and I want to be able to criticize things even if I love them. I think, you know, that is a good point. Someone says, well, I couldn't stand Lev descriptions of women. Fair enough. I noticed it too. I wasn't a biggest fan. Ultimately though, the things I loved about these were so many that that thing paled in comparison, but this is just for me. And it might be a very different experience for someone else. So I think that was mostly what I wanted to share with you about the book, how I perceived it, the emotions that stirred into me. It was a journey. I experienced so many emotions, from happiness to absolute despair, through also bereavement. I did not know, or I did not remember, because I have these experiences before in other few of my favorite books. But when you experience bereavement for a fictional character, that, to me, that's a sign that I found our ultimate favorite. I am actually grieving your absence. I am actually grieving your death. And that is the key. To you, it might be something else. For me, it's either like utter joy or I am grieving. So after finishing this book and reflecting on, you know, how I wanted to conclude this review, I think it's what I feel in a nutshell would be, I feel enriched as a reader, as a human who loves literature. I feel like I'm more wealthy, not of money, of course, but I'm more wealthy from the breadth of emotions that I was able to experience and from the wisdom I took out from many passages of this book. I know that it's not gonna happen, but I just wonder if Benioff would actually write Collia's book. I want to read Collia's book. So I wonder if one day Benioff will give us Collia's book. It probably never will. It's one of probably those things that needs to be mentioned, it needs to be in the book, but they also need to come with mystery. They need to be incompleted to have the same power that they might have. And so if he was ever to write that, people might be disappointed or not. Instead here, we will never know how good Collia's book would be. And that's the unknowing part that makes it so special, right? It's like the Pulp Fiction bloody suitcase. We will never know what's inside. And therefore, everything could be inside there, nothing could be inside there. So we can't be disappointed by the not knowing. And that it's clever in itself as a plot device. I think that's extremely clever. I would love to know how you received it. I would love to discuss this book with you in the comments down below. By now you know that if you want to stick around, and I would love for you to stick around and chat with me in the comments down below, you can click subscribe. And I would also love to know your feedback on having a whole review. Is it helpful? Going to be more details? Does it spark more conversation potentially in the comments? Let's see. But thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Take care of yourself. Ciao!